Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Headed into our next segment here. We talked about the Mavericks winning this series and how it is this, massive celebratory moment. There's a lot to still celebrate from the Timberwolves side of the way that this season played out, being in contention for the 1 seed all season long, so putting together a good regular season, making it to the conference finals where a lot of people were sort of dubious. Maybe it's the fact that it's Minnesota and they don't necessarily get the same type of respect from a national media basis, but still, I think to be able to take down the defending champs in the Denver Nuggets was a big surprise to me. And this season, overall, I think you have to consider it a success given sort of where things left off last year with where the Timberwolves were sort of falling apart by a lot of means. You had, of course, the fight between Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson during the last game of the season. Jaden McDaniels broke his own hand punching a wall in that final game as well. So, they were seeming to be imploding a little bit, but come back this year and put together this excellent season that, again, disappointing to go out, I think, specifically in the way that they did, getting blown out by Dallas in this winner-go-home matchup at home. Now, I'm curious what it was behind that. I didn't think that this was a Timberwolves team that was sort of going to be of the mindset, oh, well, at least we just, didn't get swept. We avoided that. So now if we come back, cool, but we understand the, hardships ahead, being down 3-0, and maybe they just counted themselves out. But again, I thought it was really disappointing to see them go out that way. But again, still a 56-win season for Minnesota. You have a Defensive Player of the Year. You have another All-NBA defender, Cat and Anthony Edwards, both All-Stars. Edwards gets on his first ever All-NBA team as well. So a lot is very encouraging here for the Timberwolves moving forward. But I do think that a lot of people sort of underestimate the youth factor of, Anthony Edwards is the star. He's 22 years old. We know he is going to get better and, become more of a postseason player. Obviously, he was great for the first 2 rounds. He definitely looked worn out to me, though, by the conference finals, especially being tasked with some of the defensive assignments as well, trying to help out more on Luka and Kyrie. But when you look at this Timberwolves roster, there are only 3 contributing rotational players from this postseason run that are under 28 years old in Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, and Naz Reid. I have some sneaky down the pipeline love for Leonard Miller. I think that he can eventually be a contributor, but in terms of players that were performing for them this postseason, it was just the 3 of them. And then other than them, the majority of their contributing players are on the older side in Gobert and Conley, and including Towns, who's going to be headed into his age 29 season next year. So definitely not old by any means, but it's not like he is still this rising prospect. He is in his prime, and I think that maybe the consistency of the three-point shot can get better, and some of the stupid fouls that I continue to get worked up about, I need to sort of let that go because it's just a part of his game, it seems like. But it does feel like something that's correctable, so maybe mentally Towns can sort of avoid some of the mistakes that he makes. But for the most part, he probably is right now what he is going to be. And the Wolves are now approaching headed into next season, a bunch of contracts taking a jump and potentially approaching the second luxury tax apron, which for those of you who aren't necessarily aware of how this works, there's the salary cap, and then you can go over that, and with each apron there are more and more restricting factors that are put onto you, some examples of this in the second apron is you can't receive a player in a sign and trade. You can't combine multiple cheap contracts in a deal to go out and get one more expensive player. Can't sign buyout guys at the deadline. All of sort of those different types of restrictions. And Timberwolves, they're going to be, their combined salary right now headed into next season is going to be $185 million. The second apron for this past season was 182. So by those means, the Timberwolves would be in the second apron. I would imagine there's going to be a jump, at least somewhat, in the salary cap this offseason. So maybe they fall just under it. But, one way or another, we are seeing that they are going to be a very, very expensive team next season. When you have guys like Jaden McDaniels jumping from $3.9 million to $22.6 and Towns jumping up from $36 to $49 million. Edwards is going to take his jump as well from $13.5 to $35 million. So you get the point. These are key contributing players that they can't necessarily just dish aside that are now going to be making considerably more than they did this past season, which is fine. They're all deserving and they are still a very good team. But is this a situation where the Timberwolves feel like they can develop this group that is already there because they are going to be handicapped in terms of the potential upgrades? Is this a team they think can sort of round themselves out and mature to the point of being in the finals and winning it all? And listen, they just made the Western Conference Finals, so it's not like they're far off by any means. But the Western Conference is going to continue to be really good, and so are the Timberwolves. But, I think that ultimately here, it's clear that the Timberwolves do have some holes. They are not a perfect roster. They definitely need another creator in my eyes offensively. It was very Anthony Edwards heavy, which is fair because, again, he's only going to continue to get better. But you would like to have some other options around. Now, Jaden McDaniels had a couple big scoring outputs throughout this postseason. I don't know how much you can burden him with, becoming a true on-the-ball guy. I think that is probably asking a lot of him, although I am very high on Jaden McDaniels, so, we'll see. I'm not going to spend too much time on Leonard Miller because the majority of NBA fans probably haven't heard of him, but a little bit of on-the-ball experience when he was in the G League, I believe it was, G League Ignite, and his background, I think going back to high school, does have a little bit more ball handling, and he's a lengthy guy, so he would probably fit into sort of what Minnesota's doing there. But again, don't want to go off on that whole tangent right now. But I think that it's another creator alongside Anthony Edwards. I do feel like they need another point guard probably. Now, sort of up for debate. Luckily for them, we're seeing sort of the opposite with them, where Conley's deal was a little bit more front-loaded, where his contract was $24 million last season. It's going to be just under $10 million next season. So that's definitely, a positive for them to some degree. But they are very reliant on him, I would say, as well, in terms of, the difference of just being able to have somebody other than Edwards be trusted to take the ball up the court and sort of initiate some of the offense. I don't know if you want to necessarily go starting point guard and push Conley to the bench. I feel like Conley's a little bit better than that, but he is going to be 37 and 38 years old in these next two seasons. It's probably something to at least consider for them. And, like I mentioned, it's going to be hard for them to upgrade their team considering the financial situation, which does sort of bring me very briefly here into the idea of, could Karl Anthony Towns be traded, where he's going to be paid $49 million this season, and he is only going to continue to get more expensive as the years go on here. So that's something that you probably, and again, Towns is an all-star caliber player, so there's absolutely talent there, and he provides you something offensively, but at the same time, I talked about this before. The Timberwolves did just sign Naz Reid to a new contract extension this offseason, won Sixth Man of the Year, and he's somebody who could, I think, sort of slide into that same type of role as Karl Anthony Towns if that's the direction the Wolves wanted to go and sort of, spread out maybe that very large Karl Anthony Towns contract amongst the rest of the team in terms of adding some other offensive pieces around Anthony Edwards. Again, just an idea here. I'm not necessarily saying that they have to or I expect them to. I'm not sure what the market's even going to look like this summer, but I do think that Naz can sort of slide into a very similar role to what Cat does if the Timberwolves want to continue to run with the, double bigs in the starting lineup. Naz could also continue the six-man role and come off of the bench. So I think the Timberwolves have options is, what I'm getting at here, and I'm curious to see how they choose to maneuver all of this, but we saw the Celtics, who are currently in the finals, they made the cutthroat move of trading Marcus Smart, who was the longest tenured Celtic and was beloved by fans, and they ended up getting Kristaps Porzingis, who was a perfect fit for the team. So, again, not an easy decision by any means, but something that I do think could be potentially worth sort of kicking around the idea of moving on from him. But I think that, ultimately here, again, the Timberwolves, it's great to see them have the success this season. And, moving forward, I think that Anthony Edwards probably is one of those players that as long as he's on your roster, you have a real shot of winning. But they also, as much as this season was good and Rudy Gobert fit into what they were trying to do, they still gave up a lot of future assets for him, among with, a bunch of different players. They also traded their first-round picks in 2025, 27, and 29, plus a pick swap in 2026. So, they're not necessarily going to have the benefit. We just talked about, the Derek Liveleys of the world and these rookies that have helped contribute in the past couple playoffs. I don't know necessarily how much they're going to be able to rely on that youth talent if they're picking more so in the second round in the second round. And you know what? We just saw Andrew Nembhard step up in a big way for the Pacers in their Eastern Conference Finals. He didn't get quite as much run, but Peyton Watson, I'm struggling right now to remember if he was a late first or an early second. But, he got some run time in the Lakers series. Obviously, we saw the Nuggets sort of turn away from him in the Minnesota series. But Watson is somebody who could probably be a contributor for them, in these next couple seasons as well. And Timberwolves are just, again, a little bit handicapped in that sense as well. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. I'm definitely not trying to come across as too strict on Minnesota because their season was great. But there is, again, I think maybe slightly more urgency than people are really viewing them with. So give me your thoughts on the comment section. Let me know if I am sort of out of line here. But we're going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, I want to talk about how the Mavericks got to this place of being in the NBA Finals. What were the key moves, again, after what looked like it was going to be a little bit of a tough run there at the beginning of Luka's Mavericks career with all of the outside noise that was going on. So we're going to be diving into that after this quick break. Stick with us. We will be right back.